Shock. Her grandson whispered, "When will she finally die?" Then she found a 40-year-old secret in the old clock that destroyed their greedy plans. Watch her silent revenge. Evelyn sat in the dim corner of the living room, her fingers tracing the faded embroidery on the armrest of her chair. At 79, her hands were a map of veins and wrinkles, but they moved with a deliberate grace that no one in the house seemed to notice anymore. The room smelled of lemon polish and stale coffee, a scent that had once comforted her but now felt like a cage. Her grandson, Marcus, paced the kitchen adjacent, his voice rising in sharp bursts as he argued with his wife, Leela. They didn't bother lowering their tones anymore. To them, Evelyn was just furniture, an antique piece taking up space until it could be sold off. "When is she finally going to go?" Leela hissed, slamming a cabinet door. "She's draining us dry. That allowance we give her, it's coming out of our savings. And for what? She just sits there, staring at nothing." Marcus sighed, the sound heavy with feigned patience. "I know, babe, but she's family. We can't just, Besides, when she passes, it'll all be worth it. The house, the investments. Grandpa left a fortune. We've got to play nice until then." Evelyn's heart clenched, but her face remained impassive. She had heard variations of this conversation before, whispered in hallways or muttered over dinner. They assumed she was deaf to their cruelty, or perhaps too frail to care. Her allowance, once a generous sum from her own savings, had been whittled down to pocket change, enough for a weekly tea bag or a cheap magazine. They controlled her phone calls, her outings, her meals. "For your safety, Grandma," Leela would say with a saccharine smile, as if Evelyn hadn't raised a family, survived wars, and buried a husband without crumbling. The antique grandfather clock stood sentinel against the wall, its mahogany case gleaming under the soft lamplight. It had been her father's wedding gift, a towering relic from a time when craftsmanship meant something eternal. Evelyn wound it every evening, a ritual that grounded her amid the chaos. Tonight, as Marcus and Leela's argument escalated, something about medical bills and putting her in a home, Evelyn rose slowly, her joints protesting with familiar aches. She approached the clock, her slippers whispering against the hardwood floor. The pendulum swung lazily, its tick-tock a steady heartbeat in the otherwise tense air. Evelyn opened the glass door, her fingers brushing the cool brass weights. As she turned the key, a memory flickered, unbidden and sharp. Her father, years ago, in his workshop smelling of sawdust and pipe tobacco. "Evie," he'd said, his eyes twinkling, "every good clock has a secret. This one's got a compartment behind the pendulum for important family papers. Keep it hidden, you never know when you'll need a surprise." She hadn't thought of it in decades. Life had moved on. Marriage to Harold, children, grandchildren, widowhood. But now, with Marcus shouting about inheritance taxes eating us alive, the memory resurfaced like a lifeline. Evelyn paused, her hand hovering. The argument faded to background noise as she gently lifted the pendulum aside. There, tucked into a narrow slot in the wood, was a small brass latch. With a soft click, it gave way, revealing a hidden drawer no bigger than a book. Inside lay a yellowed envelope, sealed with wax that bore Harold's initials. Her breath caught. Harold had died 15 years ago, his heart giving out after a long battle with illness. She remembered him as a quiet man, practical to a fault, always planning ahead. Trembling slightly, she slid the envelope out and tucked it into her cardigan pocket. The clock's door closed with a gentle snap, and she resumed winding as if nothing had happened. That night, in her small bedroom upstairs, once a storage room, now her cozy nook, Evelyn sat on the edge of her bed, the envelope in her lap. The house was quiet now. Marcus and Leela had retreated to their master suite, laughter filtering through the walls as if their earlier venom had evaporated. She broke the seal carefully, unfolding the letter with hands that betrayed only a faint shake. "My dearest Evie," Harold's handwriting began, steady and familiar. "If you're reading this, I'm gone, and things have gone sideways. I never told you about the trusts. I set them up quietly after our son, Robert, hit bottom with his gambling. He blew through his share years ago, but I couldn't let that poison the grandkids. Separate funds for each, Marcus, Elena, and little Theo, bypassing Robert entirely, managed by our old lawyer, Mr. Thorne. Activate them only if needed, otherwise they grow untouched." Evelyn's eyes widened. Trusts? Harold had always handled the finances, but she assumed everything went through the will. The letter continued. "And the beach cottage in Maine, remember the one we visited on our honeymoon? I bought it outright in your name alone back in '82. Deeds enclosed. It's yours, Evie. A safe haven if the world gets too heavy. Don't let anyone bully you out of it. Love always, Harold." Clipped to the letter were documents, bank statements showing substantial sums in the trusts, a notarized deed for a quaint cottage on the rocky coast of Maine, and contact details for Thorne and Associates. Evelyn pressed a hand to her mouth, tears blurring the ink. All these years she'd lived modestly, thinking the bulk of their savings had dwindled with medical bills and Robert's debts, but Harold had safeguarded it all, hidden in plain sight within the clock her father built. The isolation hit her anew. Marcus, her grandson, had been a sweet boy once, curly-haired and full of questions about the stars. But life had hardened him, a failed business, mounting debts, marriage to Leela, who saw family as a ledger of gains and losses. They had moved Evelyn in 2 years ago after Robert's passing, promising care and companionship. Instead, it was control. No more bridge club visits. Too risky, Grandma. Allowance cuts were tightening the belt. Conversations where they spoke for her, over her, as if her voice had faded with her hair color. But now, armed with Harold's secret, Evelyn felt a spark ignite. Not rage, but resolve. Quiet like the tide pulling back before a wave. The next morning, while Marcus and Leela slept in, weekends were their recharge time, Evelyn slipped downstairs. The house phone was in the kitchen, but they monitored calls. Instead, she retrieved an old address book from her dresser, flipping to F for Florence, her childhood friend who lived a town over. Florence, widowed herself, had always said, "If you need a getaway car, Evie, I'm your driver." The call was brief, whispered. "Flo, it's time. Can you pick me up tomorrow night and connect me to Mr. Thorne?" Florence's voice crackled with excitement. "I've been waiting for this. I'll handle the lawyer, discreetly. Pack light, we'll sort the rest." Evelyn spent the day as usual, a quiet breakfast of toast and weak tea, nodding along to Leela's complaints about work, avoiding Marcus's probing questions about her moods. Inside, her mind raced. The beach cottage, how many summers had Harold and I dreamed of retiring there? White clapboard siding, a porch overlooking crashing waves, gardens of wild lupins. It had been rented out sporadically, the income funneled into a forgotten account. Now it would be her sanctuary. That evening, as the argument resumed, Leela snapping about elder care costs skyrocketing, Evelyn wound the clock one last time. She left the hidden drawer ajar, a subtle clue. The pendulum swung, but she didn't reset the chimes. Let it stop. Let time pause in this house of illusions. Night fell, and Evelyn lay awake, heart steady. At midnight, headlights flashed briefly in the driveway. Florence, engine idling. Evelyn had packed a small suitcase, clothes, photos, the envelope. She crept downstairs, avoiding the creaky third step. The front door opened silently. She'd oiled the hinges that afternoon under the guise of dusting. Florence's old station wagon smelled of peppermint and adventure. "Ready for the coast?" she whispered, eyes sparkling. Evelyn nodded, glancing back at the dark house. More than ready. The drive to Maine took 6 hours, winding through sleeping towns and foggy highways. They stopped once for coffee, where Evelyn called Mr. Thorne from a payphone. Old habits for privacy. "Activate the trusts," she instructed, "conditional on respect and accountability. No distributions without my approval." Thorne, Harold's old partner, chuckled warmly. "He always said you'd know when to use this. I'll draft the letters, mailed certified, explaining everything. The cottage is yours. Tenants vacated last month. Keys under the mat." Dawn broke as they crested a hill, the Atlantic unfolding like a silver blanket. The cottage perched on a bluff, smaller than memory, but perfect. White clapboard siding, a porch overlooking crashing waves, gardens of wild lupins. It had been rented out sporadically, the income funneled into a forgotten account. Now it would be her sanctuary. Fellowshoods of years helped her work the magic. Now she felt a sense of magic in everything, which from the top would integrate her identity as a free woman. Back in the old house, Marcus woke to silence. The clock had stopped at midnight, its face frozen. "Grandma?" he called, knocking on her door. Empty bed, suitcase gone. Panic set in as Leela rifled through drawers. Where's her stuff? The will papers? A knock at the door. Certified mail. Thorne's letter was clinical, devastating. Per Harold Carter's instructions, trusts activated. Inheritance conditional. Demonstrate respect via audited actions. Beach cottage solely Evelyn's.
Any contest will trigger full disclosure of financial discrepancies. Marcus slumped, face ashen. She knew all this time. Lila paced, furious. How? She's just an old lady. But Evelyn wasn't just anything. She was a woman who had outlived wars, raised dreamers, buried loves, and now reclaimed her horizon. In the cottage, Evelyn brewed strong tea, watching gulls wheel overhead. The letter from Harold lay open on the table, a companion in the quiet. For the first time in years, she felt visible to herself, and that was enough. Did you know anyone with the same pain?